Welcome to the Wellness Esquire podcast. I'm Ariella, and I'm so excited for you to listen to this conversation with my friend Jordana Confino. Jordana is a former practicing attorney who now, as an expert in positive psychology, perfectionism, and professional development, has been taking our industry by storm as one of the leaders transforming how we practice law. We talk about Jordana's career journey and the internal struggles she experienced that led her to start learning about what it means to be happy and why that even matters, how learning about positive psychology changed her life and her career, the 2024 Lawyer Perfectionism and Wellbeing report she co-authored, her postpartum experience, what it's like to be an expert in the science of well-being while still just being a human being like the rest of us and doing her best every day, and so much more. Jordana is a sought-after speaker, and her passion for working with lawyers, law students, law firms, and law schools to help everyone maximize their well-being and achieve value-aligned peak performance bubbles out of her. Jordana is one of my absolute favorite human beings ever, and we in the legal industry are so fortunate to have her guiding us to a healthier, happier, more authentic, and sustainable way of practicing. I know you're going to get tons of value out of this conversation with my dear friend Jordana. Thank you so much for listening.
Hello!
Yay!
Oh my God, I'm so happy to see you.
Oh, me!
We made it!
Yay!
We made it!
Oh, yay! Oh, I'm so excited.
I'm like, you're so tan too. Look at which one of us has been outside in the past year, and which of us has
It's
been under
very
a
funny
rock
to see.
or under a baby.
What's that?
I said, guess which one of us has been hiding under a rock or a baby, and which of us has been out in the world.
I'm not sure. I'm usually your color. It's I feel like I'm a color block human. That just, I've got the parts, that still look like you. I don't wear makeup anymore.
Mm-hmm.
When I was my former version of feeling really sick all the time, and I felt like I needed to hide what I looked like.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel like that anymore. So much of it is the sun.
Well, you're radiant, so there's nothing to hide.
Well, it's so much fun. I feel so much lighter. And it's it's the sun. I mean,
my trick is just whenever I look like death, I just put on glasses, and I'm like, you can't see me behind my glasses, and you probably can, but it's like my invisibility cloak.
Well, what's funny is I look at you and I'm like, you're put together, you're gorgeous. I don't see the paleness that I understand you're talking about, but I understand it because I've been you, and that's naturally who I am. But it's we see it in ourselves. I would never have even started with that. That's not how I see it.
I think you look gorgeous. And I'm happy. I'm just happy to see you.
I'm so happy to see you. How are you feeling?
Oh my God. I'm so glad that we rescheduled because I'm not a zombie today. And I was a zombie last week. And so this is just such a better time for this conversation. Good. And also yes. So thank you again for that.
I like to imagine what the world would look like if we all said those things to each other. And because it's not enough to just know the things on our own of what one should do.
Yeah.
You need someone else to be like, wait a second, I just heard what you said, and the beginning of that sentence didn't really align with the end of that sentence. And it was, but imagine if that's what we could do with everything that you and I both do.
Yeah.
If we could actually.
And it's interesting because I feel like sometimes it's oh, I'm not feeling in my best state, so I can't come to this meeting. And it's what are you talking about? This meeting has to happen now. But then there's also the many times where it doesn't have to happen now. And I feel being able to know the difference between those things.
It's really hard. And I think no one trains us to assess what's actually urgent and what's actually time sensitive. We're just led to believe that everything is, which is absurd and not true. But that's the urgency of the industry and the culture. And so we're just well, I can't possibly postpone this because someone decided that it has to be done by Tuesday for no reason, but just because someone chose a deadline. And I remember, this I'm sure has happened so many times, but I have a specific memory of and this was after I launched my own firm, so I was my own boss and I was in charge, and I kept a meeting with a client because I was like, well, we have a meeting scheduled and I can do anything. And I was so sick, and you could tell through the screen. And I didn't, I've got my tools that help me feel sharp, even sharper than I might otherwise, even when I don't feel well. But I still was not at my best. And, it was a client that loves me, and it was, but I was like, oh, it wasn't a waste of anyone's time, but if we had just like waited 2
It would have been
days,
different. It would have been different.
It wasn't necessary. Nothing was time sensitive. I just felt like, oh, we have the meeting. And I always remember that. And I've actually come to love when people reach out to reschedule, and kind of especially when it's last minute, because most of the time people are
like wonderful. It's like, ooh, I get an hour in my day.
Well, right. So 2 things for me. One is I get time back, and the other is I get to be the person who helps the panicking person who thinks that they're failing someone else be like, oh, I can chill, and that's okay. And so when you and that's why, I mean, in my that's how I email people now. Like that goes in my automatic my automated scheduling reminder, and with the podcast, I'm like, if you want to reschedule, that's fine. This shouldn't be your priority. Your priorities are never going to be the same as mine. That's just how it goes. And we think so much about bandwidth being about time. And so, like, if you technically have the time today to do it, well, therefore you should. I think we should be talking about bandwidth in terms of energy.
Yeah. No, and I feel like last week was always was also a good reminder for me, because whenever I'm feeling like a zombie or just totally drained, the biggest concern for me, and this is so classic perfectionist thinking, is like not like, oh, I don't feel good right now, but like, oh, what if I never have energy again? And just like imagining that, like, if it's now, then it's forever. And then I got some rest and I was like, oh, I do feel like a human again. So
absolutely. But also I was prepared that you might get to Monday and be like, you know what, I'm doing better, but I still need like this hour to take care of myself. And that was also going to be fine. Yeah. Today's Monday, right?
I am very much the wrong person to ask that question to. I'm like, I'm here. I can't tell you anything else about where in space or time we are, except for that we both made it onto the Zoom.
It's kind of funny. So what you just did, I do too, which is a complete lack of recognition of still how well we function, how much you could actually tell me. Because you could spew off a whole lot of everything that we're going to talk about that you're an expert in. And yet when we're so tired, we're just like, oh, I suck at all sorts of things and I don't even know what day it is. And all I can do is,
Well, so that is, I feel like I have a grasp on a lot of things. Days of the week are not them anymore. That is just like, I feel like time is something that I've lost any concept of.
Me too.
Like I have no clue. If you asked me when the last time we spoke live, if you could have told me it was 2 years or like 4 months ago, either one would make total sense to me.
I agree. I also feel very strongly that there are many things in life that you have to remember and you have to store up here. And everything else, you just need to know how to figure out or where to find. And things like time and days.
That's why I have a calendar on the wall. My schedule is my daily calendar. Like I got this massive thing called a skylight where it's literally like a big screen TV and it's on the wall in my kitchen. And it tells me what I have to be doing and what's on my schedule that day. And I got it when I had my baby. And the purpose was so we could all like sync the family calendar, but I'm the only one that uses it. So it's just my calendar. But having my calendar on the wall in massive font in my kitchen has been a game changer for me.
I completely understand that.
Yeah.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Amazing. Couldn't recommend more.
Amazing.
Instagram sold it to me.
We need those tools. I was raised on the value of having the right tool, and life changes when you have the right tool. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. We have loads to talk about, and we could talk about everything for a really long time. So We're recording everything, and I'll edit, and I'm thinking we'll get through some of our favorite topics today, and then whenever schedules permit, we can
Yeah.
just keep going on other things. And I want my initial thought around this podcast was
Mhm.
I have these conversations with people all the time, and I wanted to open them up to other people and have it just feel super, super casual and just
Yeah.
make it clear how normal these conversations are among certain people and how
Mhm.
much more we're actually having these conversations than a lot of people realize, and
Yeah.
just make it super, super accessible. So
Love it.
that's the deal. Yay.
I'm excited.
Okay, amazing. Well, this is going to be extra fun because we've talked about some of these things before, but it's been a while. So
Yes.
I want to start with your story. What led you to law school in the first place?
Oh
And
gosh.
then, in a nutshell, what law school through now has looked like and how you ended up doing the amazing work that you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, I went to law school for all the wrong reasons. I was in college. I was a psychology major with a sub focus on teacher prep because that was what I loved. And everyone told me that if you go to a liberal arts college, you can study whatever you want in college, and then it doesn't matter for your career, which I still think is true, pretty much. So that's what I studied. But then when I got to junior year, all of my friends were getting their internships in finance and consulting. I was like, oh, I need to figure out what's next. And it didn't feel, I felt like going into like being a therapist or doing a PhD in psychology, it was way too not type A for me. I was like, they just sit around for the PhD programs. I'm like, they just sit around talking for years without taking action. I would lose my mind. And then being a therapist felt insular to me. So I was like, all right, what do I want to do? Well, I didn't say think what do I want to do. I think, what should I do? And by that point, I had caught the raging overachiever bug, you might say. And so I was very focused not on what do I want to do, but what should I be doing because it's prestigious. And so I knew that I wasn't into math or spreadsheets. I was like, okay, not finance or consulting, but law school seems like the next intuitive step for a high achieving person who was good at school and taking tests. And so I ended up going straight through from Yale College to Yale Law School. And basically, once I got into law school, I needed to come up with a better idea of what I wanted to do because just cause was not that satisfying internally or externally. And so I had been involved with human rights work. So I was like, okay, I'm going to become a US attorney or an assistant US attorney. I'm going to do sex trafficking prosecutions because that is super prestigious and also, theoretically aligns with things that I'm interested in. That's what I'm going to do. And so by the time I actually started in law school, I had this in my mind. And I'm like, all right, what do I need to do to be able to get the most prestigious, clerkship law firm job so that I can get that AUSA position? And I just went guns blazing through law school, ticking all of those boxes. And at that point, I really believed that the way to get all of those things was just by sacrificing every other aspect of my identity and my well-being, except for sleep, because even then I knew that I needed 8 hours of sleep in order to get those perfect grades and do that perfect work. But really, aside from sleep, just gave myself 150% to the work. And so got all the jobs I wanted, lined up the prestigious clerkships, graduated with straight honors, had the big law offer, was, living the dream that I had thought for myself. And I was absolutely miserable. I was so lonely, it physically hurt. I was so anxious that I remember describing myself as a hamster in a pressure cooker. That was the feeling inside my chest. I was so viciously cruel to myself on the inside. I had a raging case of imposter syndrome. I thought that I was getting everything, I was tricking everyone into thinking that I was smart and masquerading as this capable person. And I was about to be found out. And the only way to make sure that didn't happen was just working myself into the ground, and really was just in a constant state of anxious misery. And yet pushed on, started my clerkships afterwards. And then ultimately, I just hit this breaking point in terms of both mental and physical well-being. So my brain had been screaming at me for years that something was wrong. I didn't listen, and then all of it started manifesting in my body and all sorts of chronic pain and health problems. And ultimately, I just hit a point of really unignorable burnout. And it was at that point, literally a Google search on how to be happy when I was so miserable and honestly hopeless, that I discovered positive psychology. And it hadn't been taught in undergrad when I was studying psychology. And so I ended up just reading about it online. I was like, oh my God, there's this whole scientific theory on how to be happy, and I want to learn it. So I ended up enrolling in this course, and very long story short, it just blew my mind. And I was like, oh my gosh, all lawyers and law students need this. I need more of this. I want to pursue this and then also bring it to other members of the profession so that they can avoid this trap that I have led myself into, and figure out a way to not only not break down 2 years into their career, but actually do it in a way that fuels them, as opposed to destroying them.
Oh, wow. Fueling instead of destroying. That's quite a way to put it. So what is positive psychology?
Positive psychology is the scientific study of human flourishing. So basically, if you think about a lot of things that might be described as like woo-woo self-help stuff, positive psychology is the actual science behind it. So it looks at what are the factors that support or promote optimal human functioning or thriving, and then how can we cultivate them? So whereas traditional psychology is really operates around a disease model, so it's focused on diagnosing and treating mental health challenges or bringing people from, depressed or suffering or anxious back to neutral. Positive psychology looks at how can we take people from neutral or just being okay to actually thriving or experiencing the most possible satisfaction or fulfillment. And there's a ton of research showing the links in positive psychology between our personal well-being, our happiness, our feelings of well-being, and then all of these other positive outcomes professionally, physical health-wise, performance-based. And so that was the initial hook for me, which was like, oh my gosh, I thought I had to sacrifice every aspect of my well-being in order to be successful. And you're telling me that that's not only not necessary, but actually counterproductive. Like that does not compute and goes against everything I've ever learned. And so that's the first part. And then it's a science behind like, okay, so it turns out positive emotions, a sense of meaning, positive relationships, having a sense of engagement, having values, alignment, all of these things actually fuel not only happiness, but also performance and longevity. And there are things that we can do to actively cultivate them. And that really, for me, was the second mind-blowing part, that one, I've had this formula for both happiness and success backwards this whole time. And two, I'm not spoiled goods because my brain is wired in this, ruthlessly perfectionist, negative way. I can actually do things to rewire my brain in a way that will support not only greater happiness, but also open the possibility of higher performance in a sustainable way, as opposed to one that feels like it's killing me every moment.
Amazing. Okay, so you started consulting and teaching and helping lawyers and law students to recognize that thriving without suffering was an option.
Yes. So initially I started just with law students. So I went at this point, when I did my certification, this was before the lawyer well-being movement had taken root. So this was like right before the National Task Force had come out with its report. So no one was talking about this. No one cared. So I was like, okay, what can I do? What's the closest thing to lawyer well-being that I can do? And so at the time, it was student services at law schools, because there weren't really well-being programs at law schools at these points, but there were student affairs did do some sort of personal counseling for law students. It was like, okay, I go to Columbia Law School. I'm going to do that and try to bring this there. For my capstone project in my positive psychology certification program, which I ended up doing over the course of a year, I was the only lawyer in the program. And my capstone project, I made the syllabus for what is now my positive lawyering course. And I'm like, I want to bring this to Columbia. I want to teach this. They didn't want anything to do with it that time. So I was just doing my personal counseling, trying to incorporate it in. At the time, the task force report came out. I got involved in broader lawyer well-being efforts. Fast forward a few years, Fordham was like, we want to create this office of professionalism, and we view well-being as a core component of it. We want you to come be the dean of professionalism, build out this office. Also, you can teach your class here. So I'm like, amazing. Started doing that there, got to teach my class. It was the most fulfilling thing I had ever done. Fast forward another couple of years, my students are graduating and calling me from their law practice jobs being like, I would not be surviving if I didn't take your class, but we need more of this. And also someone needs to be sharing this information with my colleagues and my boss. And so then I found myself spending like 10 hours a week after work on the phone with former students, now lawyers, basically helping them apply this stuff in their lives. And then I was like, oh, okay, maybe there's a need for this out for practicing lawyers as well. And that was when I shifted from my dean role to doing the coaching and the training for practicing lawyers, as well as teaching the course on the law school level.
Did you find that the students that you had worked with at Fordham were more equipped to even recognize that they needed help than people who had no exposure to anything that you were talking about to begin with?
Yes, and I will also say, though, there was a shift during from when I started at Fordham to a few years later. And so when I first started teaching positive lawyering, it was still the time where this was early. It was pre-COVID. You kind of had to sell well-being stuff to people. Fast forward a few years. I mean, actually, I will say the second time I offered positive lawyering, within like 3 seconds of course registration opening, it was oversubscribed and there was like a very long wait list. So it caught on quickly, but certainly just in general, there has been a shift in the appetite and the interest for this stuff over the past few years. And definitely among the younger generations, Gen Z, we're seeing more of it. It's less of a sell, I would say, but it's increasingly becoming that way for older generations as well. But I think we're definitely seeing a shift. And I think that COVID really went a long way in terms of normalizing this and emphasizing the importance of well-being, and also the link between well-being and professional performance, and recognizing that this isn't just like fluffy self-help stuff. Actually, this is something that is going to turbocharge our professional performance and longevity, as well as making us feel good.
Ooh, feeling good.
Which is also a good thing. When I'm talking about it, I joke, I like to speak to the lowest common denominator. So the person who doesn't care about feeling good or care about feeling healthy, because I didn't care about those things. I just wanted to be successful. And so the people who care about feeling good, they're going to come on their own accord. But if you can make the case for, even if you don't care about those things, still listen because it's going to make you more successful, then we can get so many people who need it the most in the door. And it's not a bait and switch, because it really will make them more successful. It'll also just help them feel better.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you. Okay, so you recently spearheaded a major study on lawyers and perfectionism.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. Talk about what led to it, the impact of perfectionism on performance, and the results of this really incredible study.
Yes, so deglorifying perfectionism is my passion project. It is a very, very personal passion for me, because I am living it myself every single day. So basically what happened in my story, I gave you the Spark Notes version earlier, but it's not the full picture, because what happened was I discovered positive psychology. I'm like, oh, there's well-being is important. And there's all these essential elements of my well-being, like relationships and meaning, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm currently not experiencing any of them. So I realized that everything that I was doing was completely counter to my values. And so I made a big shift. I went from practicing to working, focusing on law student well-being. I created enough space in my life to start dating my now husband. I was fostering my personal relationships more than I had been before, which was zero at all. And I was in this job that theoretically was everything that I wanted at the time. And I thought, like, oh, I've taken myself out of that pressure cooker environment. Like, now I'm going to be happy. Now everything's going to be great. And a number of months into my first year at Columbia, I burned out again really, really, really hard. And at that point, the physical manifestation of the year, because oh my gosh, I've had so many different chronic health issues at this point, was actually I could not walk. So something happened with my knees and my hips where for over a year I could barely walk. I could barely stand for more than 10 minutes. And so at this point, that was really traumatizing for me. And so when working with my own therapist at the time, I ultimately recognized, like, okay, I had made all of these changes to my life to try to cultivate these different pillars of well-being, but I was still tearing myself to shreds on the inside. I was still constantly hustling to prove my worth and operating from this like deep-rooted fear and shame and imposter-based mentality. And so it was an epiphany moment for me. I'm like, oh, you can take the toxic work environment, but if you don't take that toxic boss or that toxic drill sergeant out of her head, she is not gonna thrive or flourish. And it was at that point that I realized, like, oh, there's something else going on. So beneath the surface that is really preventing me from fully leaning into all and reaping the benefits of all of these other changes I'm trying to make. And that was my perfectionism and the way that I was relating to myself. And so it was at that point that I really doubled down on that work. So spotting and reining in my inner critic and learning to cultivate self-compassion, which at the time I thought would make me weak, lazy, and complacent. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard of. And really altering that relationship with myself. And that was the most powerful thing I had ever done. And then when I started coaching, I recognized, so initially I was like, oh, I'm just going to focus on lawyer well-being. Was not focusing on perfectionism, but with so many clients I worked with, I was seeing the same patterns. Like they were coming to me, we were doing all of these other things that I would say are like levels above that, how they're relating to themselves, but something was getting in the way from these changes working in the way that they wanted. And I recognize that there's really this level zero or step zero aspect of how are you relating to yourself beneath the surface of everything else. If you don't learn to see and change that, nothing else is going to make that much of a difference. And so that was when I really started honing in on perfectionism with my work with clients as well. And so now I've been doing that for multiple years and seeing just the transformative impact on if we can replace perfection with what I like to call big picture perfection seeking, which is still striving for excellence, but striving from a place of values-based striving as opposed to fear or shame-based striving. And rather than using our inner critic as our motivator, learning how to fuel ourselves with encouragement and sources of intrinsic motivation. And I've seen the transformative results. And I know that 99% of the profession still glorifies perfectionism and equates it with excellent work product and drive and determination and meticulous attention to detail, all of which are distinguishable. And so there is research out there showing the many ways that perfectionism impacts and impedes professional performance as well as well-being. And we could talk about those, but I knew that lawyers think that they're special. And so they don't care about all this research on non-lawyers because they're going to say, well, big law requires, or just law requires perfectionism. So here it's really helping. And that was why I felt so strongly that we needed a study on lawyers in particular, showing that, oh no, perfectionism actually has these really negative consequences for professional performance for lawyers as well, to open the minds of people okay, well, maybe there is a different way that we could do this that would preserve the excellent work product, but actually enable us to perform at a higher level.
For me, when I learned about the difference between maladaptive perfectionism and adaptive perfectionism, I feel like that was just a life-changing moment. And so can you explain the difference.
Yes.
And I think you and I
So and I think
that
that when I call it big, so I call it perfectionism and big picture perfection seeking, but you can call it maladaptive and adaptive perfectionism. The reason that I change the names a little bit is because I feel like people get confused when they hear the two types of perfectionism. They're just like, oh, perfectionism is great. And so I like to really make clear, like, these are separate things. But maladaptive versus adaptive perfectionism, or perfectionism versus big picture perfection seeking, the maladaptive perfectionism is the fear and shame based perfectionism. So it's all deeply rooted in that I am not good enough or I'm going to be rejected. And so I need to prove that I am. I need to avoid that failure. And I like to say that perfectionists or maladaptive perfectionists, they're never really playing to win. They're playing not to lose. So it's all about avoiding more shame and avoiding being outed as not being good enough, as opposed to running towards something that you really, really value. And so that's one important distinction. Like, what is driving it? Is it values-based motivation or is it fear-based motivation? Another big difference is that maladaptive perfectionists reject reality. So they decide that as long as I work hard enough, or if I'm just good enough, if I work good enough, then I should be able to make the impossible possible. I should be able to do every single thing I want to do absolutely perfectly without compromising anything, even though, there are 24 hours in a day and energy is finite. And that is just not possible. Whereas adaptive perfectionists or big picture perfection seekers can recognize, like, oh, there are constraints. Like, no matter what I do, there will only be 24 hours in a day. No matter what I do, I will need to recharge and replenish, and my battery will get drained. No matter what I do, it's not always going to be possible to do everything simultaneously 100% if the math is not adding up there. And so what that empowers them to do is recognize, and this is why I like the analogy of big picture perfection seeking. Okay, it's impossible to do everything 100% here. So how can I intentionally prioritize and carve up my time and even say no to certain things in order to achieve the best possible overall outcome that is actually attainable? Whereas maladaptive perfectionists will just push themselves forward saying, well, I just need to make it happen, and then end up reaching a result that's not actually the best outcome because they end up just like spending their time and energy on whatever is right in front of them because they tell themselves, like, I will get to everything, even though that's impossible. And so that actually ends up being a form of self-sabotage. And then they'll tear themselves to shreds because they didn't somehow make it possible. And that gets to I think the last possible, or a last important distinction between them is that maladaptive perfectionists really try to drive themselves with this blame and shame and fear-based motivation. So they think that inner critic and that inner drill sergeant in their heads are driving them forwards, when really all of the brain science shows that's just destroying our capacity for the most effective performance. And so adaptive perfectionists realize that their worth and their value overall does not rise and fall with their achievements in any one given moment. And also that motivating themselves again with encouragement and compassion, self-compassion, is actually far more effective than tearing themselves apart.
what's an easy way to start, simple way to start for someone?
So, yeah, it's interesting because simple or easy?
That's I
Simple, but
started with
not easy.
easy,
I think,
and then none of this is easy. It gets easier. I think
yes, it's
we start
absolutely
simple and recognize
simple.
it's going to be challenging,
Yes.
and you're not going to do it perfectly.
I think the most simple thing is starting with, what is that voice in your head saying to you all day? Like, how are you talking to yourself all day? Because most people probably don't even realize that we are talking to ourselves literally all day long. There's this constant just loop playing in the background. And for many of us, certainly for the perfectionists, it's ruthlessly self-critical. And so just starting to raise your awareness of that voice, because for many of us, it's so deeply ingrained that we don't even notice when it's there and it's piping up. And so for me, oh my gosh, my inner critic used to be so vicious, but just constantly, it was like, you're not good enough. You're going to be terrible at this. You better work really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. You haven't done anything in the past 2 minutes. You're weak. You're lazy. Da 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 da. And so, but I didn't even recognize that it was there. And so really just pausing to ask yourself, like, what am I saying to myself in my head, especially when I have some sort of mistake or a setback, or if I'm about to undertake a challenge, and then learning how to separate yourself from that voice and recognize that it is not the voice of truth, objective truth and reality, which you probably think it is right now, but let's just operate on the assumption that maybe it's not. And then learning how to just curiously observe that voice so that you're not just carried away with whatever it's saying. And it sounds silly, but the research shows that if you actually draw another being, and then when you notice, so you draw like a little critter or a little, whatever, green goblin on your shoulder, whatever, however you imagine what that voice looks like. And then you can imagine when you hear those thoughts popping up, them coming from this separate thing, that actually empowers you to create distance, which then enables you to turn the volume down on that voice and say, like, hello, critic, I know that you're trying to help me. I know that you think that you're helping me right now, but actually all you're doing is paralyzing and distracting me, or all you're doing is swooping me into a frenzy, and it's not actually constructive. So I'm just going to need you to quiet down a little bit so I can focus on what I'm doing. And even just learning how to turn that voice down, or you can imagine putting it in a little box and being like, my critic is saying to me XYZ, but that doesn't mean I have to listen to it right now. That's an amazing first step. And then the next step to build on this is learning how to actually replace its message with a more compassionate response. So saying to yourself what you would say to a dear friend if they were in your shoes and were saying, like, that person gave me a constructive comment on this. I'm weak, lazy, stupid, awful. No one's ever going to want to do work with me again. Like, what would you say to your friend if they came to you saying that? Probably you wouldn't be like, yeah, and let me kick you again to really make it stick so you don't make this mistake. You would probably say, everybody makes mistakes sometimes. That's not even a big one. And you had no way of knowing that. And now you do. Just tuck that away for the future. And they're not going to be thinking about this again. Like, there's a million things going on. And you are doing so much that you should be proud of. Like, hang in there. This feels hard because this is hard. You are not broken. Something like that. And if you can start practicing saying something like that to yourself, even when you don't believe it. I mentioned earlier rewiring our brains, and there is science of neuroplasticity that we can actually train our brains to think in different ways by practicing thinking in those ways, even when we don't yet believe it. And in case anyone's listening and being like, this is ridiculous and will make me weak, lazy, and complacent, I just want to hop in there and say, actually, no, that's what I thought too. I told my therapist that it was going to turn me into a weak, lazy marshmallow, which is why I refused to even think about self-compassion until I hit my breaking point. The science is bananas on this. How so counterintuitive, at least for me. Treating yourself with self-compassion actually turbocharges growth, performance, learning, basically every possible metric. And self-criticism does the opposite. And so practicing relating to yourself in this different way. And again, it's simple. It's not easy. It's really freaking hard. But if you can just practice it, it is the most transformative thing that you can do for yourself.
It's worked for me.
Me too. And I always tell people, I'm like, I am living proof that this is possible. My inner critic was so off the deep end. And I so strongly believed first that this was hogwash initially. And then once I was like, oh, maybe this isn't, because like there's 100 studies showing that there's no way I'm going to be able to implement it. And both of those things were proven to be false with me. And if I can figure out how to do this, I truly believe that anyone can. And so that is why I just feel so passionate about, proselytizing about this to anybody who will listen.
I am so with you. What can law firms and legal organizations do to help their to improve the legal culture around perfectionism, because it's not just coming from the individual, it's how we treat each other, it's the expectations that practices set.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things. So one is creating a culture. I feel like the opposite of toxic perfectionism culture is culture of psychological safety, where we recognize like, oh, it is impossible to do everything 100% perfect 100% of the time, especially when we're in an environment when we're learning, which people always are in law firms. Like you come out of law practice and you have to learn a whole new set of things you come out of law school and when you go into practice, you have to learn a whole new set of things. And unlike law school, there's not an instruction manual where it's like, if you study it hard enough, you can ace the test. Like you're constantly learning, you're constantly presented with new challenges. Mistakes are going to happen. Also, even if you're not doing something new, if you're doing a bazillion things a minute, mistakes will sometimes happen. And so normalizing that, recognizing that, yes, we'll do everything that we can to avoid mistakes, but they are part of the learning process. And so rather than punishing them and scaring the living daylights out of people, we're going to say, okay, here's what we should do when we make mistakes, and here's how we can learn from them. And I think that acknowledging that you can strive for excellence while still occasionally having learning opportunities. And actually, the only way that you're really going to level up is by doing something wrong, because that's the only way to stretch yourself and grow. That's step one. And I think if more senior people are willing to model growth mindset and share their own stumbles and learning stories, as opposed to just being like, oh yeah, and I was perfect when I got here, I never made any mistakes, and so I expect that of you, that would be a starting place. I also think that just being realistic about expectations. And so it kills me when people tell associates, like, you must always say yes to every request. And because if you say no, you are going to be, perceived negatively. But what they don't say is, if you are stretched so thin that you can't fully deliver on your work, you are also going to be perceived negatively. And in fact, you are going to be perceived even more negatively if that's the case. And so, of course, we want associates to stretch. They need to be able to take a certain amount of work, but there are times when the best decision for the work product for the clients is to say, no, actually, I'm at capacity. And if I say yes to this, everything is going to suffer. It's not going to be the best possible outcome. It's not going to be big picture perfection. And so I think being clear about that, because I feel like associates are like, I can't ever say no because that's the wrong answer. But what they're not recognizing is that in an effort to be a perfectionist, they are never saying no. They're sacrificing big picture perfection because they're going to be disappointing someone in a more meaningful way on the back end. And so I think that recalibrating expectations, not in a way that is, supports laziness, but just in a way that comports with reality, is another thing. So that and the psychological safety, the modeling growth mindset, I feel like are both two very important steps in that direction.
I think that sets us up well to move into talking about boundaries.
Yes.
Which are so important to set,
important and so hard
to set and maintain, and
yes,
so much harder to maintain than to set.
Yeah. And they're pretty hard to set too.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about, first of all, like, some more examples of how boundaries come into play when it comes to high performance, and also what makes it so hard for us to maintain those boundaries. For me, I feel like when I have become more comfortable with myself, liked myself more, had more faith in myself, believed in myself, and had less of a need for external validation, it became a lot easier to recognize it when my gut was saying no.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that if you're operating from a place of deep rooted inadequacy and just fear of being rejected, you will never feel safe enough to draw a boundary because you're like, I can't disappoint anyone in a moment, in a single moment. And I just need to please at every step. And I think that a lot of people think that like, oh, boundaries are barriers, or, boundaries cut off relationships. I think it's different when you're thinking about boundaries in a personal and professional context, because I think there are certain things in a professional context where it's like, well, you can draw that boundary and that will actually, be a deal breaker. So if I'm like, I'm just, it's really better for me if let's say I work at a law firm, I'm like, it's just really better for my mental health if I just don't work ever on Mondays. They can be like, okay, that is a boundary that like that doesn't fly with us. And so whereas like, so there's certain things there, but I think that there's so many boundaries. The way that I like to describe it to people when I'm working with them is like, yes, if in the legal profession, often, especially if we're working for a traditional organization, we're operating in a cage because there are the rules of the road that if we break them, that will be a deal breaker for that organization. So for instance, the example that I just gave, right? But I know that so many lawyers and law students, legal professionals have created this cage that is so much smaller than the cage that they're actually living in on their own, and are living within this much smaller cage of their own making because they think that they can't draw any sort of boundaries and that they have to actually be, doing all these things that aren't necessary. So case in point, I know so many junior associates who will stay online until like 1 a.m. in case someone emails them. And they're like, oh, I can't go to bed because if an email came in, I would need to respond immediately. And I'm like, well, when's the last time that an urgent email came in at 1 a.m.? They're like, oh, well, it might. Or like someone emailed at midnight the other day. And I'm like, well, what would have happened if you didn't respond until the next day? They're like, well, I don't know. I just need to respond. And so they've created this smaller cage, which is I must stay up until 1 a.m. just in case. Or for instance, like if someone asks, are you free to do this? I must say yes, because no is always the wrong answer. And they haven't even tested the assumption, well, what would happen if I said, could I get this to you tomorrow? Or must it be done tonight? Or I'm out of office right now, or like I'm, at XYZ right now, I can turn to this first thing tomorrow. What would happen? And we're so scared to even test those theories that we don't do it. I think another thing is sometimes we do it and then someone rejects the boundary, or they don't like it, or they make us feel guilty, or they make us feel stressed. And I think that one of the things that is so hard because we don't want to sit with someone else's negative emotions. And here's where it comes down to, I think there can be a difference between personal or professional, because in personal relationships, I like to think of boundaries as the bridges to better relationships. And the only people that won't respect us drawing boundaries that really are necessary for our own well-being are the people who benefit from us having no boundaries and care more about our lack of boundaries than our well-being, and then query whether those are the types of people that we want to be in relationships. If we're in a job, and we don't have the luxury of saying, do I want to leave this job right now? We need to think about the consequences of how the person reacts to our boundaries. That being said, there's a really big difference between, Jordana, you cannot send these emails or you will get fired, and, them not seeming thrilled with you in the moment, and being able to tolerate other people's discomfort, recognizing that you're not going to get fired just because someone isn't thrilled that you didn't, agree to do something at midnight that could wait till tomorrow. Sitting with those challenging feelings and recognizing that the world can go on is very difficult, but also very important.
So you recently had a cute little baby.
Yeah. He's so cute.
And one of the things that's come with that has been, learning how to juggle, obviously, the joys, but also the stressors that's come along with that on its own. And then add to that a really incredible, thriving career where you're incredibly sought after, but that also takes a lot of your time and energy, and it takes some travel sometimes. And so you're having to apply the science that you know to
Yes.
your life. And part of that is about boundaries, and part of that also is about perfectionism. It's there's so much that you know about what is the ideal way for you to manage a situation, manage your well-being practices, manage your day, and it doesn't always happen. So
Yep. Yep.
share how that's going.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I remember saying to my husband before she was born, I was like, I feel like I'm just almost kind of making it work now. And now there's gonna be like a human here who's gonna ostensibly require like a lot of time and support and energy. Like, how is this gonna work? And it's been fascinating. There is so much that you can't control in motherhood, which has just been such a masterclass in recovery for me because I perfectionists love to control things, and I just you know it's not like that. And so self-compassion has been huge, but the bound I've had to draw so many more boundaries because like I love work, and I would work so much if I had all the time in the world because I love it so much. And now I have this other huge thing in my life that's really important to me, and so there's less space for everything because the pie now has this new component that it never had before. And so, even just a really vivid example of this is so I only see clients during the week. I was traveling for work all week, 1 week, a couple of weeks ago. And so I made an exception and I saw a client on a Sunday, but it was only because I was going to be, out of commission. I'm like, okay, I want to be able to continue seeing my individual clients. I'm going to do this. And then I recently had a client be like, could we do Sundays? Like, it's really, really better for me. And I'm usually so accommodating. And I was like, I just can't. I did that once, because I was going away. I wanted to make it work, but like I don't have childcare on the weekends and I can't. And that was it was an uncomfortable thing for me. And I'm 100% not another time, I would have been like, oh yes, let me bend over backwards more to make this work. And what I've found is that, again, in your words, Ariella, flattening myself or just sacrificing myself and what I know I need for someone else is not going to strengthen the relationship. It's not going to strengthen the service because when I'm depleted or if I'm feeling guilty, like I'm not going to be showing up at my best. And that's just one example. But another thing is just being able to relax my expectations for myself. Like I'm not able to be as active in my business as I was before because there is this other huge thing that I'm doing. I can still be as in everything that I'm doing for my business when I'm doing it, but being able to not punish or judge myself for not being, doing things exactly like before, that has been a big shift for me. I will say though that I think the biggest shift for me, even more so than before Poppy was born, was during my pregnancy because I was so sick for my entire pregnancy. And it was not even just 9 months, it was the 10-month pregnancy. By the way, pregnancy is 10 months, not 9 months, which I did not know until I was pregnant. Like, I don't understand why we're all raised to believe that pregnancy is 9 months because, like, that last month, it's a really hard one. Like, it's a very relevant month. And not even that. I did IVF before that. All of that was really, really hard on me. And I could not perform in the same way that I did before all that. Not that I couldn't show up in the same way, but my energy to perform that way over time without breaks, I could not push myself in the same way. And so I had to really, really adjust my expectations for myself and allow myself to rest so much more during that period than I ever had before. And honestly, I feel like raising my daughter and working is a lot easier for me than being pregnant and working was because it was just that debilitating. But that really required me to acknowledge like, oh, this is something that I can't push through, and beating myself up for that is certainly not going to help. How can I care for myself in this moment and optimize the situation so that I can show up fully for the things that are more important, as opposed to pushing myself, and probably just breaking and not being able to do anything the way that I want to.
Now that you know everything that you know, how often do you feel like you still find yourself pushing past when your gut says, stop, bad idea, I can't do it, or not right now?
Oh, weekly. And that's why my blog is Chronicles of a Recovering Type A plus Perfectionist, and not Chronicles of a Recovered Type A plus Perfectionist. But the difference is I now can catch that. And sometimes often I will course correct in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then if other times I'll notice afterwards, if like, oh, yep, I did that. Note to self, don't do that next time. And so I think that some people might hear that and be like, oh, well, that's really depressing because, she's an expert in this. She's been doing this for a decade and she still doesn't do it. And no, it's actually really empowering because it recognizes like we always can be like, all right, what's the next step in the right direction? And also what I will say is that let's say that I was doing that 100% of the time, overriding, and ideally I would not be overriding. It would be 0% of the time. I'll say I override right now 30% of the time. But even when I went from 100 to 90%, or even 100 to 98%, every single percent, every millimeter of progress of being able to like listen to and honor what your mind and body are telling you and honor your inner knowing, as opposed to like having fear calling the shots, every millimeter of that is just a bazillion times worth it. And you can ebb and flow. And when you ebb, when you relapse into perfectionism, just recognizing like, oh, I did that. And now I can take a step out of it. Like I've been in this hole and I know how to get out, as opposed to like, oh shoot, I'm back in the hole. So this is all pointless. And I think that that's really important because a lot of people, when you talk to them about this, they're like, oh, but I can't get my inner critic to go away. And so this is pointless. And it's like, one, the inner critic doesn't have to go away. We just need to learn how to relate to it in a way that it's not calling the shots. And that takes work because often when it comes up, it comes with a really, really, really strong, even seemingly irresistible, compulsive burst of anxiety that's telling you you must act in accordance with me to make you go away. And there's tools that you can use to surf that urge of anxiety so that you're able to sit with that discomfort, recognize it's really uncomfortable, but also get to the other side of it. And the more that you practice this and give yourself that compassion, the more you'll be able to. And then once you start gathering evidence, like, oh, I can hear that voice and do something that's different than what it says, and actually those results are so much better, this will give you momentum to build on that will make it easier going forward. It's a constant practice. For better, for worse, it's just the truth.
Do you need to stop like exactly on the hour, or?
No, I can go for a few more minutes.
Okay. Do you have favorite go-to practices that you do regularly that help you take care of yourself? And then do you have certain go-to practices when you're having your hardest moments?
Yes. Regularly, one, I need sleep. Sleep. And so, and also I'm a terrible sleeper. And I know when I do not sleep, it's not just like, oh, I'm tired. My anxiety and my mood, everything just goes to a bad place when I don't sleep. So yes, having a newborn is really challenging. She actually just started sleeping, so we're out of the dark ages. But in normal life, like really prioritizing that sleep is huge for me, even when it means, drawing boundaries on the front and the back end. Also, I like to be able to take 10 minutes over breakfast. So I eat breakfast later in the morning. I have two breakfasts. I have a little breakfast right when I wake up, and then I like to have my real breakfast a few hours later. And usually it's after I start my work day. And just being able to sit and eat my breakfast without working for those 10 minutes to just reground myself is really, really important. I also I am an introvert through and through. And so I absolutely love connection is one of my top values, and it depletes my energy.
Mhm.
It energizes me in a way in the moment, but then it depletes my energy afterwards. And so finding time in quiet and silence to recharge myself, and honestly reading fiction is my best way to recharge. So trying to find a little bit of time for that, either at night or on the weekends, is really really big for me. And those what I would say are my staples. And honestly, when I'm having a really hard time, the usually my anxiety gets so ratcheted up that I feel like I cannot pause, forcing myself to take that pause. And whether it's like going for a walk, whether it's reading my book, it's those days where you're like, I can't take 5 minutes to pause, but I'm like, okay, I need to take 20 minutes to pause, because I know that my nervous system can get this twisted up into this little ball where I get stuck in this frenetic energy. And not only am I not feeling well, I'm also not working effectively. And just knowing how to like see that, and then rather than judging myself or getting frustrated with myself or trying to push myself further, just giving myself some love. Also reminding myself, and we were saying this right when we get on the call, my perfectionist all or nothing brain gets so worried that when I'm having a hard period, it's going to be permanent. And so where my brain, left to its own devices, goes is, well, I need to push through or else I'll never get anything done. And what I've learned is like, no, this is not permanent. If I can just kind of nurture myself right now, I will feel better. And then I can get so much more done in a way that feels good, rather than just feeling like I am like breaking down over here. And actually, that's one thing that's been really helpful from raising my daughter, is like everything can change overnight with a baby, and just recognizing the impermanence of different states for better and for worse. And so like being able to just be kind to myself and let myself ride the wave when I'm feeling down, just like try not to operate heavy machinery today if you can avoid it. Metaphorically speaking, I rarely operate heavy machinery anyways, has been really, really helpful for me.
Amazing. Anything else you want to cover today? And then we'll do this 30 more times.
Oh my gosh, I think this is a good spot for today. I feel like not doing things to death and quitting when things feel good is a very
Mhm.
non-perfectionist mentality. I feel like I always want to keep going until it hurts, and then that's my signal to stop. And I've found that that's actually not the best way to do things. And so quit when it feels good, like leave the party when you're having fun, and you can still get home for your 10 p.m. bedtime, and
Ooh,
then
10
you'll
p.m.
want to go
bedtime.
back. My favorite party is one that lets me leave and be in my bed by 10 p.m. That is my type of party.
Oh, I'm completely with you.
Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this when your pie is already so filled.
It is my pleasure. And thank you for giving me the invitation to cancel last week when I was not feeling energetically up for this conversation. And I just want to give you a shout out for that, because when I got your email being like, let me know if you need to reschedule because you don't have time or energy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do have time, but I don't have energy. And I didn't even recognize that that was a permissible excuse for us to postpone. And I'm so glad we did, because I feel like a human today, which I didn't last week when I was going on not nearly enough sleep for my liking. And so
I
hopefully that will end up paying off for the listeners as well.
It will. And I love that interaction so much, because when I started understanding the science around well-being and learning to make this progress for myself, one of the ways that I struggled was thinking, oh, but I know what to do now. Why am I not doing it perfectly? And a really critical factor for me was having a husband who would say things like, don't talk to my wife like that, when I was being really mean
Yep.
to myself, and
Yeah.
who would, kind of be for me what I was for you in that moment of saying, wait, what you just said there, doesn't align with how we're trying to live.
Yeah.
And for the listeners,
Yeah.
I have this message that I share with podcast guests where I say, I'm excited to talk to you tomorrow. But if you need to reschedule, whether because your schedule changed, your needs changed, and that includes your energy, totally fine. And you responded with, I'm really excited to talk to you tomorrow. I'm totally stretched too thin. So if you could do any of these other days, that would be better. But if not, I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And I said, what I heard was, you're already pretty flattened, but if it's better for you, I will flatten myself fully. And I thought, no, that's not how we do
So
it.
you didn't. Oh, with my head, I was like, well, if you want to talk to zombie Jordana, she'll be there tomorrow. If you want to talk to like non-zombie Jordana, she can be there on Monday.
I didn't even think about the zombie part because I know you well enough that you're going to show up with value no matter what. And we'd have this hour or so and you'd be amazing, but then you'd completely crash. And your husband would have to take extra care of you. Your daughter, you would have to be more exhausted taking care of your daughter. And it would impact your day and your week. And why do that? And so one of my visions with the Wellness Esquire is, what if we could all be that person for each other and say, hey, does this actually work for you right now? This is not actually important. I mean, maybe it's important, but it's not urgent. What can we adjust? What can we shift? How can we learn to reprioritize and understand when we can also deprioritize?
Yeah. And I love that so much. And that's really going back to when you said, what can law firms do? And I think like doing, not in law firms, but just people do for each other. And that is a huge thing. And like, yes, there are times when it's going to be urgent and we need to step up and get things done, even if we're not feeling in our best state. But so often that's not the case. And being able to know the difference and operate, recognizing that it's not like we must always operate like it's a fire drill.
Default mode.
Or never, exactly. And being able to switch through those selectively, recognizing that by not treating everything as a fire drill, it's actually going to enhance our ability to really deliver when it is a fire drill. So
yeah, amazing.
Thank all right, so to be continued then.
To be continued. Amazing. I'll talk to you soon.
Love you. Thank you for this.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got a ton of value from this conversation and that you will check out the links in the description to learn more about the guest and the Wellness Esquire. And I hope you take even just 1 minute to do something for yourself today. Maybe right now, drink more water, say no, call a friend, do something that makes you happy, have a 30-second dance party, find something to make you laugh. Also, be sure to subscribe and send the podcast to a colleague. And if we're not yet connected on LinkedIn, please fix that. I'd love to know you. See you next time.